It's a good thing. Yeah. Carol, we're ready. It is 2 o'clock on my phone. We don't have a clock on the wall here anymore. I call the meeting, the Committee of the Whole meeting for February 20th to order. I will note that Councillor Macon and Councillor Abatoy are not with us today for various reasons. I would like to announce or state that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of our treaty relationships that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. It's time to look at the agenda, folks. Any additions or changes to propose for the agenda? Not seeing any. Let's move on. We'll talk, I think, about minutes from last meeting. Any errors or omissions noted for the minutes as published and given to council? Not seeing any. Would somebody care to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I would so move that council adopt the Committee of the Whole meeting minutes Tuesday, June the 21st.
Okay, try it again, please. Still not on? Cheryl, help me out, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Gord, please.
Well then, I so move that council adopt or approve the minutes of the June 21st, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes.
I'll call the question. Let's vote, please. Cast your vote. Motion is carried 5-0. I don't believe we have any delegations in front of us today. And seeing none, I think our first order of business is Pawn Shop Bylaw C27-22, and I think Corinne Rayner and Lee Hardman are presenting, and I see a third person. Maybe Corinne, you could introduce everybody, please.
Certainly. I've asked Inspector Barry LaRocque with the RCMP to join us to help answer any questions you might have.
Perfect, thank you.
So good afternoon, Deputy Mayor Kelly and members of council. My name is Corinne Rayner. I'm the Director of Protective Services for the city. I am presenting information on the new proposed Pawn Shop Bylaw C27-22. And I've already introduced you to my helpers here to help me answer any questions that you may have. Sergeant Lee Harmon is with me with Municipal Enforcement. We've been working with Economic Development on the update to the Business License Bylaw, and the pawned goods section was taken out of the Business License Bylaw because of its size, and we've created it as its own bylaw. The purpose of the pawn shop bylaw is to provide direction to pawn shops to allow for the sale of legally owned pawn goods and to deter the sale of items that may be stolen or obtained illegally. One of the annual policing priorities approved by council is crime reduction, for property crime in our community. So these changes to the pawn shop bylaw will assist law enforcement by having another tool for investigations into property crime occurrences. When reviewing our current pawned goods section of the bylaw, administration found that the bylaw no longer adequately addressed regulations for reporting requirements for pawn shops. While the current bylaw requires that businesses keep a record of the purchase of sale in goods and articles, there was no requirement for these dealers to forward that information electronically so that law enforcement could have access to it. To alleviate this issue, our Protective Services analyst, the RCMP, and municipal enforcement worked together in conducting research to assess what technology was best used and what other municipalities are currently using in regards to the electronic reporting from pawn shops. So essentially, we have two significant changes that we made within the pawned goods section of the bylaw. The most significant change we have made with this bylaw is the requirement for pawn shops to report its transactions by electronic means. So this definition was added to the bylaw, and electronic means is a computer program with the capability to electronically transmit via the internet in a format approved by a peace officer. The current approved computer software for these types of transactions is provided by Business Watch International, which provides law enforcement agencies with an internet-based data management system that allows investigators to monitor real-time transactions processed by regulated businesses in the pawn, secondhand, and scrap metal industries. The program used is called RAPID, which stands for Regional Automated Property Information Database. We have not stated the name of this software program within the bylaw, as these types of software and technology change often. So we will post it on our website of what that electronic means consists of for pawn shops. Electronic reporting has a significant impact on law enforcement, victims of crime, and electronic reporting businesses. Bylaws requiring electronic reporting reduce the number of hours spent on criminal investigations. Having the ability to view information and data within the RAPID database allows investigators to quickly retrieve information and solve property crime occurrences much quicker. Specifically within Fort Saskatchewan, so our data analyst, our crime analyst will review all the files that have happened in the last 24-hour period and cross-reference these if there is any stolen property or stolen goods. She will then cross-reference these with what is recorded on the RAPID system, and we have solved many stolen goods, stolen property crimes, and made arrests and charges have been laid because of this system. This new proposed bylaw would result in improved tracking for law enforcement agencies and the RCMP to better control the items being illegally sold. The RAPID system is widely used by other municipalities and law enforcement agencies. The other significant change that was made within the bylaw sections is with fines and penalties, with an increase from a $300 fine for a first offense to $500. And then doubling this fine for subsequent offenses. This fine amount is in line with other municipalities with similar bylaws, and Edmonton and Wetaskiwin all start at $500. We feel that this amount is sufficient to be the deterrent for businesses not complying with the bylaw. We currently do not have a licensed pawn shop operating out of Fort Saskatchewan, so this is a good time to update this bylaw to better suit our needs and assist law enforcement with a tool that will deter property crime, as well as allow police to look for stolen goods that may have been sold or pawned. That was the significant changes. We've cleaned up a bit of the language and deleted some items out of the bylaw that no longer suited our needs. And that concludes my presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions. Our next steps will be to bring this back for council for 3 readings on October the 11th. Thank you.
Super, thank you. I do have questions from Councillor Harris, please.
Corinne, looking at general provisions 2C, every pawnbroker, secondhand dealer, and scrap metal dealer shall comply with requirements in and as subject to the business license bylaw. You don't have a definition in this bylaw of secondhand dealer or scrap dealer. Is that perhaps something that shouldn't be in here? I understand in other areas, scrap metal is ultimately a regulated process and similar reporting takes place. But is that maybe something that either needs to be defined or needs to be taken out of here in an editorial context? What's your intent there?
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Harris. That should just be deleted out of there. I think we've got a little bit of reminiscences from the business license bylaw that are still existing in here, so we will remove that. It doesn't need to be in here, so thank you.
So then that leads to my second question, respecting the fact that where there are metal recycling operations, which I believe there are none here, other than people can drop off scrap metal at our recycling depot, which is not a cost service or a fee service. Is there anything that comes to play relatively? I know we've heard about all these scrap metal dealers and the whole issue with catalytic converter thefts being exchanged or sold for that sort of thing. Is that kind of maybe, is that something, because that's not a pawn, because a pawn is a pledge. You give me $50 and I'll give you my watch and I'll come back, and if I give you $50 I get my watch back, right?
That's correct.
But with scrap, it's a different thing.
It's a different story.
It's a commercial transaction.
It is, and it is regulated through the Alberta government through the Scrap Metal Act. So there is legislation that regulates scrap metal dealers through the Scrap Metal Act.
Okay,
Alberta. So yeah, and we don't have one that operates within Fort Saskatchewan.
Okay, so that's just an oversight in terms of the language in this draft bylaw. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Nguyen, and after Councillor Nguyen, I will interject or insert myself. Go ahead, Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation today, Corinne. You mentioned we don't have any licensed pawn shops in Fort Saskatchewan, so my question might not be unnecessary, but in the case that we do have one of these businesses that move into town, can you give me an idea of kind of the procedure of implementation of this bylaw? Perhaps this is a question for Mr. Hardman. Like, will you be visiting a pawn shop and having a monthly look at their inventory and then referencing that with like stolen good reports? Is that kind of how it works, or is it more of a complaint driven? If somebody is missing an item of significant value, then you can go check their inventory according to the new bylaw? That could be a question for anyone.
Through the chair to Councillor Nguyen. So typically it's complaint based, as well as when we have RCMP occurrences with stolen goods, then the analyst will check the rapid system to see, has this item been pawned? And it can be pawned all over Alberta, and she would be able to look at that on the rapid system. Through our pawn shop, they would have a business license, and municipal enforcement would go in and just check to make sure they have their business license and that they're in compliance, basically, and not selling other secondhand goods and those types of things. So definitely municipal enforcement do engage with those businesses from time to time.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the answer. Yeah, so RAPID really just streamlines this entire process for province-wide reporting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Corinne, I've got a couple questions. Paragraph 2, bracket F, it references an 18-year-old age, and it says no pawnbroker shall employ a person under 18 to take a pawned good from a customer as security. The way I imagine these shops is that they're all very small, or most of them would be very small. The ones in Fort Saskatchewan would probably be small. Why wouldn't we just set a minimum age of 18 to work in a pawn shop so that you don't get any cross-contamination sort of thing going on?
Through to the chair. To answer that, I think it's to do it. The reason for that is because they're essentially giving loans to people. So it's through the financial aspect of, is my understanding of why that age limit is there, is that when we pawn goods, we're giving a loan to someone. So.
And I support the age limitation, but I don't understand. In a small shop, I see a conflict where the pawnbroker owner says, "Well, I've hired Joe here, who's 16, just to work in the back," but the owner disappears around the corner to have a coffee with a friend and doesn't lock the door. And I guess what I'm suggesting is that, as personally, I would prefer there just to be a minimum age of 18 to work in the pawn shop. And I would encourage you to consider that if you think it's warranted. I've got other questions. Please bear with me. I think you may have answered this already, but most of this is covered in legislation regulations of senior levels of government, is it not? With the possible exception of the rapid system, and that's really the primary purpose for this bylaw?
Through the chair, pawned goods are left for the municipal regulations to implement those types of regulations. So there is no provincial legislation when it comes to pawn shops themselves.
I didn't know that. I thought there was. Thank you. One more, and then I'll pass on to Councillor Blizzard. There's reference to the maximum interest rate allowed federally. When I did a bit of research online while reading this for pawn shops and other payday type stuff in the local area, I admit to being a bit flabbergasted, actually. $100 loan generated a 30% per month cost. Now, it's my understanding that the Federal Act limits interest rates to somewhere around, there's different rules if interest rates exceed 30% per annum. But these organizations were charging $5 per month interest and on $100 and $25 per month storage. And there's, I guess, what's stopping those owner-operators from charging $50 per month storage? And would it be possible just to assume that any fee and charged by a pawn shop will be deemed to be interest? Could we do something like that? I consider that insidious. 30% per month is absolutely insidious.
Through the chair, so just so that I understand, should we put some type of limit on the amount of interest that they can charge, or
alternatively, I'm not. It became apparent to me that there's all kinds of words that mean interest, such as storage. It could be processing fee. It could be renewal fee. It could be one of many things. So is it possible for us to just set a limit on what the amount of fees in total could be, interest or otherwise, on a per annum or per monthly basis? And I have no clue. I'm just asking.
That's something that I'll have to do a little bit of research on and come back with when we come on October the 11th.
If you think it's warranted, would you please? I do have more questions, but I'll pass the mic to Councillor Blizzard.
Thanks. I think this is a good idea, and I really don't have any issues with anything that was included in it. I do have one question, though. It's coming for 3 readings, and this is maybe Ledge Services answer. Like, that used to be given 3 readings when there was something pressing. Is this pressing? Like, normally, wouldn't we do a reading, first reading, and then if somebody from the public had some comments, can someone maybe explain why we would do 3 readings? That's Cheryl.
Sorry, I need a little bit of clarification.
So it's coming back for 3 readings in one meeting, as opposed to, and then we have to agree to have that 3rd reading, right? Why? Normally we do a reading and then come back for 2, just so that if there's any input. So I'm just wondering if this is pressing. Why? City manager, maybe?
Through the chair. The majority of the bylaws council deals with are land use bylaw amendments, which under the MGA require you to do them over 2 separate meetings. But normal bylaws still require 3 readings, but they don't require the public hearing and the 2-week break. So that's why for anything that's not land use bylaw related, you can do it in 1 meeting if you choose.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Finished, Councillor Blizzard? Mayor Catcher?
Okay, thank you. And I think it's pretty well written bylaw. I think you've done good with that. I don't have an issue with people under 18 working. I think it may be considered discrimination, but it is put in there that they don't, that they're not allowed to sell anything. So I guess the question that I have, so we're taking it out of the business license bylaw and we're creating its own bylaw. So I guess the question that I really have, so if and when somebody decides to start a pawn shop again in the fort, they come in and they get their business license. There's nothing prohibiting them from opening a business. So will the this fall under the development permit then when they get that with the conditions? How will that work?
Through the chair to the mayor. That's a good question, and we'll consult with economic development and the planning to see how we can implement the regulations that we have with the ponds. So I'll look into that and make sure that we have a process there.
Okay. And the other question that I have is with regarding the rapid system when you talk about taking the photos and that. So if the rapid system all of a sudden has one person that's pawning a whole bunch of stuff, would the system with its intelligence actually flag that to an agency to say, you know what, maybe watch this person? Like, how does that work? Or do you guys just have to go in and continuously check?
Mayor, I don't think there's an automated system to do it. What we're relying on is the criminal analyst to go through those pawn reports or the rapid reports so that then trends would be identified. We have it already through some of the other business watch, primarily through the metals, that we're starting to see that, where we're getting different people come in multiple times. So it really does rely on our criminal intelligence analyst to go through and see either A, if there's specific property that is being pawned that can come back to criminal offenses that have been perpetrated, or whether we are getting certain people that are repeat customers who should not be in possession of those type of things that they are pawning. That would then precipitate a criminal investigation into that, or an intelligence investigation to start, and then a follow-up criminal investigation.
Okay. And so the cost of the rapid system, so when they open up, they will be notified at the time when they open. I assume most of the municipalities have this regulation, so before they can even open, they would be required to have this hooked up and confirmed with the detachment.
Sorry, through the chair to Mayor Ketcher. So the only requirement for them to start up and do business will be to have a business license, and then it will be up to them. The onus is on them to then comply with our regulations through our pawn shop bylaw. So we would just be monitoring a pawn shop. This is a type of business that law enforcement does like to make sure that they're within regulations. So we would follow up with them once they've opened to make sure that they are on the rapid system and in compliance with the bylaw.
Okay, and that's the fine, that if they're not on it, then it would be $500?
Through the chair to Mayor Ketcher, yes, that's correct.
And I didn't go through the fines that closely, but and last question, is that then time specific? So if they were to get a fine, and then how long do they have to comply?
Through the chair to Mayor Ketcher, usually it's 7 days to comply. So that's with our bylaw tags, they'd have 7 days.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll got a couple more questions, Corinne, please. Back to my comments earlier on interest rates versus other fees. What kind of twigged me on this when I was reading it would be section 4. 2, I believe, just a second, no, 4G, and in G and further down in H, there's a statement that there will be, among other things, a notice posted of the maximum interest rate allowed federally to be taken by persons. In the examples I saw online, the interest rate was the lesser of all the charges by a multiple of like 6, which leads me to believe that the real issue isn't the interest rate, it's the extras that get tagged on to the actual cost. And I would be interested in controlling that as best we could. And then, and I might not be an answer for this question, but I just note that further down, I think in the same section under brackets small I, brackets IV, there's a reference to returning goods, redeeming goods, and unless the person, the pawn shop owner being the person, has taken reasonable steps to ensure that the person redeeming the item is the same person who pawned it. Is there any indication in here what reasonable steps could be considered to be? Such as photo ID or something like that?
Go ahead.
And I don't need an answer now. It's coming back. Maybe give that a bit of consideration too, please, if it makes sense.
You're right. So there is a section that the photograph and ID, like a driver's license is swiped on their system, and that's how they'll ID the individuals that pawn it, as well as that redeem it.
Okay, to save me time scrolling up, that's defined within...
It is defined within.
As a reasonable step?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Those are my questions. Anything else from council? Did you get enough feedback to proceed?
I certainly did. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Next is an update on the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board Growth Plan 5-year interim review project update. We're marked as Shri Shinde presenting, and I see Mr. Thomas there as well. Hi, Craig. Go ahead when you're ready, please.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor Kelly and members of council. My name is Shri Shinde, Manager of Current and Long Range Planning, and I'm here with Craig Thomas, Director of Planning and Development, to present EMRGP 5-year interim review project update. As you know, the EMRB is a non-profit corporation established by the province of Alberta, composed of 13 municipal leaders from across the Edmonton metro region. The MGA regulation sets the mandate for the board, which is the foundation of the growth plan. The Edmonton Metropolitan Region Growth Plan is a long-range plan with a vision for diverse, thriving, and competitive metropolitan region. The plan builds on the strengths of the region, including vibrant rural and urban communities, abundant natural assets, rich resources, and high-quality agricultural lands. It recognizes that energy has been the primary driver of for the growth for decades and has created wealth, jobs, and prosperity in the region. It also recognizes the next 30 to 50 years will see a significant change in the region, such as the global shifts in green energy, smart technology, and the knowledge economy, and climate change will impact our built and natural environments and where and how we grow our food. The composition of our communities will continue to evolve with the influx of young adults and immigrants and an aging population. In the context of this massive transformation, the plan was created to build a stronger region and attract investment through regional collaboration and planning. To provide some history on the journey of the regional board, in 2010, the province approved the Capital Region Plan. The second iteration of this growth plan was approved in 2017, which is known as Reimagine, Plan, Build Edmonton Metropolitan Region Growth Plan. It is at this time the board was shrunk from 24 member municipalities to 13, following which the member municipalities brought their MDPs in alignment with the regional growth plan. This was an MGA requirement. Fort Saskatchewan's MDP, Our Fort, Our Future, was adopted in January 2021. The next implementation action is the 5-year review of the growth plan, which was initiated earlier this year. In February 2022, the board approved the project charter for this project, and in April, the task force was established. On June 28, 2022, Council adopted the city's 2023-2026 strategic plan. A strategic initiative within the strategic plan includes Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board Growth Plan, Interim Review, and Update with Council. The objectives of the review were established in the growth plan policy. They are to review and update the employment and population projections to align with releases of federal census data. Consider plan amendments if, based on the KPIs review, specific outcomes are not being met. Consider plan amendments to accommodate the outcomes of the work completed since the adoption of the growth plan. This includes projects such as the Integrated Regional Transportation Master Plan, Regional Agriculture Master Plan, and Regional Broadband Situation Analysis. The project charter with 5-year interim review of the growth plan is consistent with these established objectives. As such, the scope is limited to the following consideration: that the population and employment projections be revised to 2050 to inform other initiatives the board may consider in the future. Review and evaluation of the KPIs, including development of targets for selected KPIs, and recommendation for incorporating completed work into the growth plan, such as the IRTMP and the RAMP. In other words, the interim review is an opportunity to collect and analyze the data to understand the performance of the growth plan policies. Given the most municipalities updated their municipal development plans not too long ago to bring them in alignment with the growth plan, the fulsome implementation of the growth plan is just beginning. Therefore, substantial changes to the growth plan are deferred to the 10-year comprehensive review. There are 3 phases to this project. Phase 1 is data gathering and includes an update to the population and employment projections, review of the existing 26 KPIs and establishing targets for selected KPIs, development and review of a synthetic model of the region to 2044. Phase 2 comprises impact assessment. This includes reviewing findings from Phase 1, review of the completed work such as IRTMP, SISB, RAMP to support the implementation of the growth plan, considering impact of emerging ESG work and how it should be reflected in the growth plan, and developing a report that brings together what we heard from population and employment updates, KPI updates, insights from the synthetic modeling, and consideration of the completed and upcoming work. Final phase is the Phase 3 implementation recommendations. This includes preparing a report and presenting to the board with recommendations for amending the growth plan based on the work completed in phases 1 and 2. Finally, let's take a look at the governance structure. 7 of the 13 municipalities will have representation on the task force, including Fort Saskatchewan. The task force will provide the oversight for the deliverables identified within this project and will be responsible for bringing recommendations forward to the board. The EMRB CEO and the municipal CAOs are considered to be strategic advisors. Project team consists of the EMRB administration, technical working group, and the consultants. The technical working group will support the work to be undertaken. All member municipalities will have representation on the technical working group. That concludes my presentation, and we are happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I see no questions yet, so I'll lead the way, and I'm sure people will chime in as they see fit. Is it anticipated that the growth patterns of our area change so significantly that they have to be remeasured every 5 years? I wonder if the dynamics change that much that it's worthwhile to do every 5 years, and what's to be gained with by going through the effort, as opposed to say every 10 years.
Through the chair to the chair. So this review is to take a look at if there are any gaps in the policies, if any minor amendments need to be changed, and to bring in the outcomes of the RAMP and IRTMP into the growth plan itself. So this wouldn't be the major changes, and probably not happening because of the, as you said, I think the development patterns might not be the reason for the 5-year review itself.
But there is a new survey of growth trends and employment being forecasted or being planned for the 5-year review, is there not?
I might be able to take this one,
Please.
Mr. Chairman. So the plan itself was always meant to be an evergreen plan, which means there needs to be a means for it to be to adapt and to be updated kind of on a regular basis. So now that we're 5 years in, I think as part of the review, what they want to do is gather some data and make any adjustments that they might see necessary. So even though they've maybe set a few targets, and they want to see maybe if that was, maybe the appropriate approach, but it allows them to pivot accordingly. And those policy changes that they would eventually implement into the plan wouldn't take place until the 10-year review.
Okay. And because I've never heard the phrase before, what is a synthetic model?
Let Ms. Shindy deal with that one.
To Mr. Chairman, it is a new term for us as well. It's newer modeling technology. It simply means a digital modeling, and they will put the data like population, employment, infrastructure status, like all the information you could fit into this digital program, and it basically creates different scenarios. So as you adjust the data, the model will show how the outcome would be. I haven't seen how it actually looks like, so this would be the first time, and I understand this is a newer thing in the field.
I'm interested to see some results from it as well. I remain a bit skeptical as I sit here. Hopefully I'm proven wrong. I've got other questions, but I'll go to Councillor Harris, please.
Ms. Shindy, I don't really have any questions on this process. I understand what they're proposing. I understand the original growth management plan framework. But my question is, obviously, we're a large province, and we have one major large metropolitan area in the Calgary area, and it's covered by a similar plan, is it not? Are you familiar with that?
Through Mr. Chair to Councillor Harris, Calgary is also working on their regional plan. My understanding is they are behind us, so their plan isn't probably as mature and as worked out as us at this point in time.
So I guess my question is, so ours ultimately was the first in the province to come up with this kind of a regional growth plan. Would it be safe to say that this is a template or model against which maybe other regions in the province, in particular Calgary, might be modeling the framework under which this type of plan is developed and maintained and modeled, synthetic or otherwise?
Through Mr. Chair to Councillor Harris, yes, this is the first one in our province, and I've heard this that when Calgary started their work, they were looking up to what EMRB did in this region. Yeah, so we are kind of leading way, but we are not the first one in Canada. So there are some other models as well.
Yeah, and outside of the statutory context, those are different provincial entities, and so I don't know if there's much similarity between them. But I was just curious about what's happening in the Calgary model, and whether or not lessons learned here help them, and vice versa. So, thank you. You answered my question.
Finished. Councillor Noyen, I apologize. I clicked your mic off. Hit the button again, and I'll knock you in. Thank you. You're good to go. No, you're not. Try it again.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation today. I had the opportunity on Friday to attend the Committee of the Whole meeting with the EMRB on the growth plan, so I gained some valuable perspective there. My question from your point of view is the 5-year growth plan, I guess besides like potential budgetary impacts it's going to have on aligning with that growth plan, from an administrative point of view and adopting the new growth plan and into the mandate of the EMRB, will that have any concerning impacts on Fort Saskatchewan, or perhaps like feedback that we should be taking back to the EMRB? Once again, from an administrative point of view in planning development. I know it's a very open-ended question, so, so there could be a lot of commentary.
Through Mr. Chair to Councillor Noyen, I'll take a stab at it. So the growth plan came in place in 2017, and we already we approved our new municipal development plan in 2021. So that is in alignment with the growth plan, and similar to the growth plan, through the conversations with our residents here, we found that diversity, inclusivity were the important things to Fort Saskatchewan as well, or the protection of the environment. So we were in alignment with the growth plan. So I don't see any concerns from that perspective. One of the things that we noticed was the density targets gets always discussed, and the densities, how they are applied, is something we have discussed in council quite a bit, and that's something our new land use bylaw will look into and try to address that, so that we get the diversity and inclusivity and not the blanket application of the densities and creation of this single use residential districts. Mm-hmm. So that's something we will explore through the land use bylaw, and that would be the implementation of the municipal development plan.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Yeah, and I look forward to the work that you guys are doing on our new land use bylaw. I think it's going to be pivotal for the growth in Fort Saskatchewan. And yeah, I do appreciate your answer on the densities. I know that's a big discussion in the EMRB. There's a lot of different communities with different demographics and different density needs. So under the entire umbrella, it's definitely a challenge.
Thank you. Any further questions? I don't see any. I'll continue then for a second or two. There's a couple of things I would like the EMRB to look at, and I'm going to put them on the table. Maybe those that are involved can take it back and consider it. We're into this now for 5 years, as become evident. It would make sense to me that somewhere around the 7 or 8 year period, and probably no later than the 10-year anniversary, that the MRB would do a comprehensive survey, in-depth survey of its members to find out an honest opinion on a member-by-member basis how the growth mandate and the density targets are actually working in communities. I think that information would be valuable. I know I struggle with it still for Fort Saskatchewan. And I was reminded again a couple days ago with something I read. This entire area gets its fresh water supply, its potable water supply from one corporation, that's EPCOR in the city of Edmonton. EPCOR taps into the North Saskatchewan River. It's an obvious statement. The North Saskatchewan River starts on the eastern slopes of the Continental Divide and the Rocky Mountains. And it has been common knowledge, I'm going to suggest now, for a number of decades, if not many decades, that those ice fields are shrinking in size. And I do know that a small ice cube melts a lot faster than a big ice cube. So given that preamble, has the AMRB give any consideration whatsoever to coming up with or looking at the source of water for the area if in fact the North Saskatchewan River becomes a seasonal river and doesn't have continuous 12-month flow, which could happen if those ice fields disappear at some point in time and could easily happen by the year 2050 from what I read. And if not, then at least talk to EPCOR and see what EPCOR's plans are for this. And it very well might be, because Calgary's affected as well, a provincial matter. But I do think somebody needs to be working on it sooner rather than later, given the pace of construction and significant construction in this country, let alone this province. And that is a comment for consideration for those involved. Anything else from anybody? Perfect. Thank you, folks, for your time. Next on the list, and we're seeing essentially the same bodies in front of us, land use bylaw project update, Mr. Thomas, Ms. Shindy, and another person, please.
Lindsay Francis.
Thank you. Take it away when you're ready, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you very much for having us this afternoon to update you on the land use bylaw project. This project is a significant overhaul of the city's land use bylaw that includes rethinking and reimagining how, what, and why development is regulated in the city. While council set the direction and vision through the municipal development plan, as we progress through this particular project, we want to ensure that council is engaged and provided with updated, regular updates with the project as we go. So joining with me today, virtually I think, are two members of the project's consulting team. So we have Natalia Schwind and Mark Reed, two members from the consultant team. I'm also very pleased to introduce our newest member of the planning department and senior planner, Lindsay Francis, who brings with us quite a bit of knowledge and relevant experience, and she'll be the lead project manager on the land use bylaw initiative. So with that, I will turn it over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Craig. And it's great to meet everyone. It's great to be here in Fort Saskatchewan. I look forward to working with you on this land use bylaw and other planning projects.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. First, I'll go over our outline for this presentation. So I'm going to go through what a land use bylaw is, why do we need a land use bylaw, the city's overall process, and the project objectives. And then I'll hand it over to our consultants to talk about the project work plan and timing and the next steps. So let's start off with talking about what a land use bylaw is and its relationship to the municipal development plan. The municipal development plan is a plan for the city as it grows to a population of 50,000, which provides our community vision. You can think of it as the destination that we're looking to go to. And the objectives within the MDP mark our path along the way. So what the land use bylaw is in this metaphor is the vehicle to travel along this path to reach our ultimate destination. And just as a refresher, I'll just quickly go over what that vision is in the MDP. So with 50,000 residents, our community of Fort Saskatchewan provides a great quality of life within our neighborhoods where everyone can grow, age, and stay, builds on its heritage, connects people, and fosters innovation, creates great places for residents and visitors to enjoy, and supports a resilient economy for everyone to achieve and thrive. So I know council's likely already familiar with this image here of the planning framework, but I wanted to highlight where the land use bylaw falls into this. So this framework is shaped like a funnel, and that is to demonstrate how each step in the process gets more and more refined as you go along. There's more details associated in each step. So you'll see the land use bylaw there is located within the implementation mechanisms, and it's beneath the MDP. And that's because it is used as a tool to implement our MDP, which is our highest level planning document. So what land use bylaws do is they regulate development on private land, and they set the standards for development within a municipality. So why does the city need a new land use bylaw? Well, council has outlined this direction within the municipal development plan and within the strategic plan. So in January 2021, that's when council adopted our Fort, Our Future, the city's new MDP. And part of the implementation of that plan includes reviewing and updating the land use bylaw, existing area structure plans, and area redevelopment plans to align with the MDP, as well as developing mature neighborhood strategies. Additionally, the direction within the 2023 to 2026 strategic plan under the well-planned community and resilient economy goal lists the following strategic initiative. Creation of a new land use bylaw to align with the MDP, promoting efficiency and cohesion between plans. And aligning these plans will provide greater certainty and consistency for investors. So in addition to the direction from council, administration has reviewed the current land use bylaw and determined that a new land use bylaw is the best strategy for implementing the MDP. A new land use bylaw is required to ensure that the regulatory tool is consistent with the MDP's strategy and approach. The MDP is innovative in that it took a ground-up approach with an emphasis on residents' and visitors' experiences in various places in the city. It recognizes different place types within the city, including downtown, established neighborhoods, developing neighborhoods, and future urban areas. And this is a significant departure from a conventional bird's eye view approach to city plans. Most land use bylaws are Euclidean style, which emphasizes the use of land over the built form. This approach to regulating land use poses limitations and is often a barrier to inclusive neighborhoods. So by updating the land use bylaw to incorporating the thinking and approach that's used within the MDP, it will enable the land use bylaw to be an effective implementation tool for the MDP. So creating neighborhoods that are welcoming, enjoyable, safe for all ages, groups, and lifestyles will strengthen the city's identity in the region. And by taking a place-based approach with emphasis on design and flexibility, the land use bylaw can enable developments that endeavor to meet the needs and aspirations of our current and future residents. If we create great places, we'll attract talent, which will then in turn support our businesses and bring new businesses to the community. So here's a high-level overview of the city's process. So phase 1 was our research and development phase. And now we're in phase 2, which is developing and drafting. And this is the phase where we're working with our consultant team. And within this phase, we'll produce a draft. We'll also be doing engagement with stakeholders. So members of council and citywide conversations as well. Administration will consult with internal and external stakeholders in workshop settings. Stakeholders will be provided the opportunity to provide input on draft regulations, and engagements will include interviews with members of council and council updates throughout the project. And then phase 3 will be the adoption of the bylaw. So with all the engagement done in phase 2, then council should have all the information that they need to adopt the bylaw in phase 3. And last is phase 4. So this will include regularly reviewing the bylaw and making any necessary tweaks. So the objectives of the land use bylaw project. The first one here is a vision. So the new land use bylaw will reflect the vision and objectives of the MDP and place types in appropriate districts. It will focus on the built form rather than use. Next is housing. So regulations that provide housing for all, and regulations which support redevelopment and intensification of mature neighborhoods. Next, we have place or placemaking. So placemaking is the process where we're creating quality places where people want to live, work, play, and learn. And the result of that process is how the place makes you feel. So we're going to focus on placemaking to foster vibrant and inclusive places. Then we have community hubs. So we'll be looking at including regulations that facilitate the development of mixed-use vibrant nodes as community hubs. Integrating uses. So in particular, the new land use bylaw will include regulations that facilitate an intensification of highway commercial and integration with surrounding areas. And lastly, language. So including user-friendly language that's easy for people to understand, being structured with visuals to help explain and clarify intent, and updating language to be gender inclusive. So now I'll hand it over virtually to our consultants.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor, and members of council. On behalf of the consulting team, we are really delighted to be here kicking off the land use bylaw work. It's a very important initiative. It comes on the heels of the MDP and many of the objectives that you've embedded in your MDP that you've just heard. My name is Mark Reed. I'm a partner with Urban Strategies, and I come with a very solid place-based background in policy, land use bylaws, and urban design. I'm here today with my colleague, Nathalie Schwind, who is from ISL, and she will speak to some of the activities that we're going to undertake in the overall MDP process. I can't see if you can see the project work plan council involvement slide, but if you can see that, that would be great to post that up. That's great. So today, what we're going to, Nathalie and I are just going to give you a kind of a high-level overview of the phases of work, the timing, which Nathalie will talk to, the specific activities that we're going to be undertaking in each of the phases of work, and how council will be involved in that work through regular updates and through council interviews, which are actually scheduled for later this week. We're really looking forward to those informal conversations with each of you so that we can tap into your understanding of the goals and objectives of the LUB, the Land Use Bylaw Update, as well as talk with you about opportunities for placemaking, concerns that you might have around process, stakeholders, engagement, and integrate your understanding into our overall work plan for this project. So as you can see, the work plan is really comprised of 4 phases of work, which really will take place over the next 20 to 22 months. If we can speed it up, we will try to do that. Right now, we're in phase 1, which is really project startup. This is a phase where we will be looking at background work that the municipality has provided on place-based land use bylaws. That's very important. They have set some really significant departure points that our team will build on as we move forward. So we're really in the phase of reconnaissance, understanding key goals and objectives of council, and preparing an overall community consultation strategy, which will be approved by our municipal team. After that, we'll move into phase 2, which is the general drafting of the regulations. We'll look at a table of content for the overall land use bylaw and address general regulations across many of the place types in the city. Phase 3 will look at placing a place-based lens over the general land use areas in the city, looking at how we can create more mixed-use communities, more diverse, more inclusive communities, both in our established neighborhoods as well as in our future neighborhoods and the existing neighborhoods. So that's all very exciting. We'll also look very carefully at intensification opportunities and placemaking opportunities in the downtown. And finally, document finalization will occur in phase 4. There'll be a lot of back and forth review with the municipality. And we will also be producing a range of very wonderful graphics that really explain the intent of the land use bylaw in all of the different place types that we're going to be working with. You can see on the very bottom line that there are a number of opportunities for council engagement. As I said, we'll be starting with one-on-one councillor interviews later this week. David Schur and I will be hosting those, and we're really looking forward to those. There will also be a later council update Also, as part of phase one, you can see that there's a number of council updates in each of the other following 4 phases as we move up to the public hearing connected with the adoption of the land use plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Nathalie to describe more specifically the detailed activities that we're going to be undertaking in each phase of work.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, members of council and administration. My name is Natalia Schwind. I am a community planner with ISL. And thank you for the opportunity to present to you today on our approach to completing this very exciting project. So I just wanted to start by saying that our approach to our work plan is based on, or based primarily on highly collaborative approach between the consultant team and the city. So when I say we, during this presentation, I am really referring to both the city and the consultant team working together on achieving the objectives that Lindsay explained to you earlier. So if we can pull up the next slide that we had in our presentation. Thank you. So here are a little bit of more detail for the work plan that we intend to carry out from 2022 to the beginning of 2024 when the closing of this project is scheduled. So as Mark said, the project startup is basically the preliminary work to lay the ground for this project. And as part of this phase, we have had a kickoff meeting with the city and the whole consultant team to introduce the members of each team and talk about some of the rules and how our relationship is going to work going forward. We did a background review of all the research and documents that the city put together as part of their preliminary work for this project. And we had a meeting with them where we presented back our understanding of these documents. And we had a tour of the community where we had the opportunity to see firsthand the issues and opportunities that the city wants to address through this document. There is a public engagement plan that is being reviewed at the moment that's going to set the specific direction for the engagement events that are going to happen throughout the work plan. And as Mark mentioned, we're going to do some council engagement consisting of one-on-one interviews that are going to go from tomorrow, I believe, September 21st to September 29th. And this phase will conclude with a council update meeting that I believe will occur in October, where we will present back all of the outcomes of these activities from phase one. Next, we have general drafting, which is about the procedural sections of the land use bylaw. So we will be drafting the general sections, the definitions of the land uses and the terms that will help the public and every land use bylaw user in interpreting the land use bylaw. And we will be launching the engagement for this project to the public, to stakeholders through social media and a project webpage dedicated to this project. And then again, a council update. Districts and overlays, it's going to take the majority of the timeline for this project because it's the biggest chunk of the work is laid in this phase. So here we're going to focus on developing the place-based regulations for the new districts and overlays for the land use bylaw, which are going to be generally in alignment with the direction provided by the MDP. So that's where we can expect bigger changes. We are also going to have a significant engagement component in this section so that we can get feedback from stakeholders and the community on the proposed changes and regulations, and then again, an update to council. And finally, we will work on the document finalization, in which we will incorporate the feedback that we received from city that's administration and council, the community and stakeholders in finalizing this document and getting it ready for review and adoption at a public hearing. So can we go to the next slide? So the next steps, these are short-term next steps. So as mentioned before, the council interviews that will happen from September 21st to September 29. We will present what we heard report on the committee of the whole meeting on October 18th. In terms of engagement, the public engagement plan is being reviewed right now, and we will have the public launch of this project in October as well. And in terms of land use bylaw drafting, we are working on a table of contents that will guide the sections and the regulations that we will be drafting in the future. We are working with the city on the procedural sections and the definitions of the land use bylaw, and we aim to conclude this phase by the end of this year before moving forward to next year, where we're going to develop the majority of the work on districts and overlays. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, so with that, we'll take any of your questions.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I have Councillor Harris first, Mayor Catcher second. I'll go third. Councillor Harris, if I can hit this button properly, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was great. It's good to see we're making headway on this very important project going forward. A couple of questions. First of all, will the consulting team be releasing any questions to council in advance of our interviews? Obviously, Councillor Nguyen and Councillor Kelly are up tomorrow or soon, and the rest of us are next week. But will there be a list of pre-questions so that we can kind of prepare and think about it, or is this an iterative process? We can just kind of react as we go. That's my first question.
Awesome. Through the chair to Councillor Harris, we can send questions in advance. The interviews are intended to be conversational as well, so there'll be lots of opportunity to talk about topics that you wish to talk about, but we have drafted up some general questions and we can send those in advance.
Yeah, for my edification, I suspect for my colleagues as well, it would help us frame the discussion a little bit better. We can prepare for it. And I think that's very, very appropriate going forward. Second question, and this might be more to our administration and Mr. Thomas and to Mr. Fleming. Respecting the fact that we have a very mature area of our community, we have a very industrial area of our community, and we also have a brand new area that is yet to have anything other than the overlay from the Strathcona County land use bylaw as it relates to the annexed area. I think in the annexed area we have about 5.5 sections of land to plan for into the future. Is that a fair assessment, Mr. Thomas?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Harris, I can't say off the top of my head, but that would be pretty close, yes.
Yeah, I'm just looking at aerial. So my question stems around the fact that, yes, obviously when we look at a new land use bylaw, we have existing uses and existing land uses that we ultimately can see where the changes will come from. But what about this brand new area? It's owned by a very disparate group of landowners. And in many respects, when we look at the overall long-term development of that, developers will come into play. Developers typically will end up buying tracts of land, and ultimately they will end up having to adhere to the land use plan once it's adopted. But how do we see the plan? Do we see this as the overarching document that's going to drive the process, to drive the overall land use, the ASPs, and those things that ultimately fall out of the need to plan for the future in this very large area, which ultimately will take us, according to our annexation agreement with Strathcona, probably out to 2050 or beyond. So how does this project in its current iteration meld with the need to plan long range in this brand new annexed area?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Harris.
Or is that a separate project?
No, I wouldn't say. I think it's all intertwined, certainly. But if we're speaking strictly about the future urban areas, In the municipal development plan, we've identified a number of place types. And so we are treating the annexation area to be undeveloped areas. It's a future urban area. So those areas would require brand new area structure plans. Neighborhood area structure plans would look much different than the ones that we currently have. So the MDP does set out kind of the vision and the framework, which guided the work that we did with our terms of reference for area structure plans and neighborhood structure plans. That really sets the groundwork and the structure and what those neighborhoods would potentially look like. So it does follow the legislated planning framework that exists. We would start with the MDP and funnel our way down into, you know, the specific regulations that would come out within the land use bylaw. What we're probably looking at, just based on the preliminary work that we've done, is that the new areas would probably take a much different approach, in that it would have kind of this polycentric or a node type of a model where you've got a variation of densities. So if you have a node with an activity center, and again, it is all kind of grounded in this place-based approach, you've got a place where people can walk to. That's, you know, there's a 15-minute walk shed to go to places where you might work, where you might play, where you would get your services, where you would live, where you would access healthcare potentially. So it is kind of embedded in that place-based approach. But there is also density that's kind of built in that would be kind of thought of as being a smart density type of a system, which would allow for your low density lots to be of varying sizes. So it wouldn't be a situation, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, where if you have a density target, we don't want to see the densities watered down, so you have a single use neighborhood. If we're taking this approach of being a place-based approach, then we want to look at how do we achieve a variety of housing types, a variety of densities in a strategic and smart way in order to attract a certain type of demographic to the community, which would ultimately lead to you know, specific strategies related to economic development. So again, I'm talking kind of high level, but again, this is kind of the growth strategy that's spoke to within the municipal development plan. And so I don't know if that directly answers your question. But,
well, it kind of does. I'm just curious then, as a kind of a follow-up question, and this will kind of put it in context. Will this council, with the remaining 3 years in our term, have a good chance to lay more than just a small amount of high-level planning, but a fair amount of granularity? Obviously, a land use bylaw provides granularity at the point where we're talking about specific land uses that ultimately flow out of the guidelines within the bylaw. But will this council, and in the remainder of our term, have a chance to really lay that planning document such that ultimately it will allow the landowners in this new area, and I'm primarily concerned about the annexed area, to ultimately step up to the plate and say, yeah, we want to be part of this process. I know you've got an engagement phase and it'll engage all those people, but will this council get a chance to lay that out in the balance of our term?
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, that is certainly the hope. I think it's one of the objectives as well. Is okay. You know, again, the thinking is that it's going to be built from the ground up. We talked about that pyramid being a funnel, and we always keep that structure in mind. But this does also present an opportunity, because we don't even have the area structure plans and neighborhood structure plans in place. But we could set out the approach, which would influence or you know, it would have some bearing on what those documents could potentially look like.
So along that line, just my last question. So are you going to lay out a framework for when we might likely see the area structure plans and the things that create that overall template for development in the future sooner rather than later?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't think the land use bylaw would specifically lay out a timeline when that would happen. It is talked about within the municipal development plan. Part of the strategy is we want to make sure that the areas that are being developed out now will develop to its completion. And then when development happens, that it's contiguous and we build off of each other. We don't want to see kind of this linear type of a sprawl. However, the MDP does enable growth to happen, provided that the necessary planning work is done. So if there is interest, if a developer were to come in and assemble the lands and want to begin development, we would have to go through that planning process, which would take into consideration what the land use bylaw would look like at that time.
Yeah, I think that's been a question that a lot of us have relative to how we're going to do the planning for this new area in relation to what the MDP talks about, and then ultimately the granularity that comes out of what this project is going to bring to the table. So I think that will be a topic of our conversations around the council table with administration going forward. So thanks for those answers. Appreciate it.
Mayor Catcher, please.
Okay, thank you. And I do understand that redoing the land use bylaws in the strategic plan, I think that was one that was probably more brought up to us through administration. So I guess the first question is the existing one really broken? Like the urgency to do this work over the priority to start doing the work for the new annex lands and preparing it for development?
Mr. Chairman, I'll maybe take this one, and if anybody wants to jump in. I don't think there's ever a perfect land use bylaw. It's similar to what we talked about with the growth plan, that it is something that should be adaptive. And we've kind of, historically, we've set out a process where we do regular updates or refreshes to make sure that we're not out of whack with development trends and these sorts of things. But our current land use bylaw it's not an effective tool to implement the planning goals and the policies that we have within our municipal development plan. It's not structured in the right way. And since we have annexed new land, and we have the ability and the opportunity to really realize these type of policies that are set out, we could do better with our regulatory document, and that's why we're going forward with this project.
Okay, well, I'm still coming back to the broken part because I've been through this about 3 times and maybe a refresh once or twice since I've been on council. But when you talk about not structured in a way that works for us, I mean, at the last land use bylaw update, administration came forward and said we want to consolidate all of these land use zones, and then we found out as much as earlier this year or even last fall that wasn't effective because we were asking the question, why are we getting all of the same land use zones? And it was like, well, it's because of how we put it in the land use bylaw. So how do we get confidence that we're going to have something that's actually going to work when we say it's not structured to what we think's working right? Well, we were told that it wasn't working right before, and we made these changes and it was working worse. So how do we get that confidence?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer it, but I also welcome my colleagues to help me with this one. All the previous land use bylaws that we had were the same approach. Ms. Francis mentioned that they've adopted this Euclidean model. That model is structured in a way that it tells property owners what they can't do, as opposed to what they can do. There's emphasis on the use of land and not so much the form. So we've talked about, and it also paints the entire city with the same paintbrush. What we've done in the municipal development plan is we've identified that there are various areas within the city that are much different than the other areas within the city. Therefore, they should be treated differently, and they should be, the regulatory framework for each of those areas should be based on what is unique and different about it. So we might use, say, a similar approach to what we're doing now in one of those areas. We might have a much more contextual approach to maybe, say, the downtown or the mature areas, because residents are very sensitive in that area. So if there is new development and intensification, we want to make sure that it's complementary, and maybe the regulations are framed on the context of what is already there. So we want to see what's appropriate, and we want to also be creative and see what's different. And like I said, every previous land use bylaw that we've done in the past has always been based on the same approach, and we want to shift that.
Okay. Next question. You talk about mixed use nodes, and then you talked about 15-minute walk to services. So I guess the question that I have on that one is, when we talk about mixed use nodes, I mean, most of the city is already set. You know, it's already developed. We've only got a small section left that really isn't. But I guess the question that I would have is, when you talk about these nodes, and we already hear from the public, we have too many of certain retail stores that come up in strip malls. At what point in time do we say we have too many of these mixed use nodes that are within a 15-minute walk that cause a lot of garbage and disruption to neighborhoods?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So I think part of the strategy that we're going to be going through is making sure of how that works. So we could say that there's a node maybe in every neighborhood, or maybe there's one node that accommodates 4 neighborhoods. And a node doesn't have to be this huge, bustling, quasi downtown. It could just be something like a coffee shop and a restaurant or something like that, with some density that's built around it. It has to be appropriate for the context. The idea is that it has to be based on the experience of the people that are going to be live there, and it has to be place-based. So we're not talking about anything significant, but we need to determine what is the density that's needed in order to support that, and what does the fabric of the neighborhood look like that would facilitate or encourage people to maybe walk somewhere within their neighborhood, as opposed to driving to something that's located along the highway, for example. And that's not to say that highway commercial is not necessary, but there's going to be a point in time when that highway commercial outlives its lifespan, and it'll have to be redeveloped. So part of what the land use bylaw is going to have to think about is, what does that redevelopment look like? So it's one thing to create regulation and policy, but it also has to work as well, because if it's not going to work, it's going to fail.
Okay. And to the chair, if I can just push that question just a little bit further. So when you talk about what's good for the neighborhood, so when you're establishing your policies, it would be like like some sort of small retail or commercial development, but within those, you typically put, well, it can be a service station, a gas bar, a 7-Eleven, those sorts of things. So because it's in a neighborhood, would you actually prohibit those as opposed to allow for those, given we have so many that are within our community?
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, and so I'll take a crack at it, but I think maybe Mr. Reid might want to add to that. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the form-based approach. And again, I talked about the current land use bylaw and how it emphasizes use over built form. And as a result of that, you might get something like a strip mall with a large parking lot. The built form aspect, it emphasizes how the building is going to look. And if you're emphasizing that, that's going to actually have an effect on the actual use or the type of tenant that might go into the building. It may be a 7-Eleven, but it wouldn't necessarily be a 7-Eleven that would be vehicle orientated that you would typically see now.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to the conversation. As I said before, I have some concerns because the last time administration came forward and they put squished a whole bunch of them into one, and then it didn't seem to work. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the opportunity to speak next. And I think Mr. Reed, if my monitor is correct, is still there, and I want to question him on a comment he made during his introduction. Mark, you made the statement that the plan was to make, and I'm paraphrasing here, the plan was to make the city of Fort Saskatchewan more diverse and inclusive, which causes me to believe that you think it's not diverse and inclusive now, and I'm asking why you would think that.
Thank you, Councillor. One of the things that we have noted in most communities across Canada is that there has been decades of development that is single purpose residential and then single purpose commercial. And so Craig is exactly right, saying that the past land use bylaw didn't get at this notion of how do we successfully mix these things, and what are the parameters that allow us to mix these things in sensitive established neighborhoods, as well as in the downtown. So again, the land use bylaw traditionally has regulated land use. Use alone doesn't make high quality, wonderful communities or places that you would want to work in, live in, or visit. You have to think about how do we create the city of the future where we really want to show off our friends and family in terms of how Fort Saskatchewan has evolved. And so this notion of thinking about use and compatibility, how can we make uses compatible to established neighborhoods? You wouldn't put a service station in the middle of an established neighborhood. That would probably be a prohibited use. But you could think about integrating a mixed use development into an older strip mall so that it didn't just offer standard commercial uses, but it offered destination restaurants. It offered the day-to-day amenities that you need to support you, a dry cleaner, a drugstore. But on top of that, you can also integrate residential uses. So we're undertaking the development of a true mixed-use node. That's appropriate for your downtown, but it's also appropriate for certain places in your community. Across Canada, we are seeing the redevelopment of 1960s, 1970s old strip mall commercial uses into mixed-use environments. That's a real opportunity for placemaking. What do we think should go into those kinds of places? A centralized park focus, high quality streets with really beautiful public realm. What's the mix of use that should be considered to make it attractive for the established neighborhoods to use? And how is it arranged so that people can get there easily? Many of the established neighborhoods that we see in Canada, and I'm sure you have them too, have got very curvilinear streets where you actually have to drive. You can't walk because it's just too long to get from A to B. Even though you might be able to see A from B, the way in which the roads are structured is circuitous, and it's not a direct route. Your MDP has very specific policy intentions around re-examining the organizational structure of your places in your city. And so I think you've taken already some fundamentally aspirational steps in the MDP. The challenge now is to look at all of the various place types and figure out what are the regulations that should be put in place, both land use and form-based. And form-based means how are streets connected, how are parks situated, what are parks situated against, what is the built form or built form typology that goes into a place, and how is all of those ingredients compatible with what you have that you consider to be very special, like your established neighborhoods. I hope that answers your question.
Mark, that definitely helps, and a little more detail and following off of Craig's comments to Mayor Catcher's questions as well. When you're comparing place to Euclidean, I'm starting to get the concept, I think, and it makes sense. So I look forward to it. I do have some specific questions. I'm looking at the set of goals under urban design, and there's a reference to Radburn concept development. When I took a minute to Google Radburn developments, the reviews were mostly negative, folks, and I couldn't get into any of the great research papers because I didn't want to pay for them. So help me understand what a Radburn concept development is, and would that be similar, by the way, Mr. Thomas, to what we see in the older part of town, south of 100th Avenue and east of 101st Street, so between downtown and the golf course?
Mr. Chairman, yes. So the drives are essentially a Radburn style neighborhood. So the idea is that the roadway that you would access the properties on would be like a back lane, and then the front of the house would face a park that would be connected to the rest of the area. When we did our tour, we took the consultants through the drives, and we also did a walking tour with some of the residents to see what they liked and some of the observations that they had. And it was interesting because there was a lot of very positive comments that the connectivity, getting to know your neighbors, kind of this shared space. People really appreciated and enjoyed that, and they could walk a long ways. There were stories about people that would walk to school, which would be about a kilometer away, and they would never have to cross the street, and they would meet up with people in the neighborhood. So there was this sense of social engagement and that sort of thing. So, but there were some negative comments because a lot of people would put fences up, and there was some questions about the care of the property and those kind of things. But there's different iterations of it, and like any area, there's positives and negatives.
I really think that's an excellent concept. I've always thought that particular unique part of town was very pretty and interesting. On that same goal, there's a reference to pork chop lots. Help me understand that, please.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, pork chop lot, it's easier for me to maybe draw it, but essentially if you were to take, say, a very wide rectangular lot, and you would create a lot at the back, and that lot at the back would be accessed by kind of a narrow strip, which would be like a driveway. So essentially it forms a panhandle or a pork chop. So it is a kind of way to create density in a way that's kind of invisible, because you've got two shorter lots that are both accessed off the front street.
Okay, that helps. Thank you. Councillor Nguyen, just give me a minute, please, and if you don't mind. This might not be a great time, but it's a question I have, Mr. Thomas. If you don't want to address it, tell me and we'll deal with it at a later date. I understand from a city perspective the benefits of density. You guys have done a good job over the last 4 years explaining that, and I understand it, I think. But what's never talked about is my observation that more dense communities are more expensive to live in. So there's a trade-off between what's actually better economically for the city or the municipality versus what's actually better for the family, the individual who resides there. And that comment, it's a question. Can you rationalize that for me? Point out a city in North America where the dense area is cheaper to live in than the suburb area, and help me understand why it's better for people rather than just for the municipality.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think, and again, like I welcome my colleagues to help me out, but I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to urban design. You can have, you know, there is a concept referred to as tower sprawl, which is simply just density, but there's not a lot of interaction with the public realm. There's not a lot of consideration about park space, and so design is very important. We did a workshop not that long ago with council that talked about some considerations that could be applied in creating spaces that make people feel welcome and comfortable in those spaces, even though there is density. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not, but
I was talking more the economics rather than the lifestyle. But we can leave it, Mr. Thomas. It's probably not a fair question for today. In summary, and I'll just take a minute, I really support a lot of, if not most of the concepts you folks are introducing into the plan. The place versus Euclidean makes sense to me. Treating the various areas of Fort Saskatchewan that are actually quite distinct as distinct units of Fort Saskatchewan and trying to plan accordingly makes great sense. So I look forward to the ongoing work. With that, Councillor Nguyen, you're up.
Thank you for the presentation today. If I'm correct with this vision, I'm very much looking forward to Dr. Thomas and his team transforming Fort Saskatchewan into a quaint European town. Don't think that's quite spot on, but yes, I have a few questions. Just going back to the Euclidean zoning, so that or land use bylaws. So that's the model that we're currently under. How prolific is non-Euclidean zoning within the greater Edmonton area? Is this something that's quite innovative, or like I know there are neighborhoods that are designed with the vision in mind as you've outlined, but how unique are we in our evolution towards this type of model?
I can answer that one through the chair to Councillor Nguyen. Within Alberta, there are a few of these kind of land use bylaws that exist. So High Level, Okotoks, Beaumont. So there's a couple of examples, but we would still be at the innovative end, I'd say.
I would say so too then. Okay, thank you. A good answer there. So does this pose, like implementing this new land use bylaw, would this pose any issues with the overall uniformity of I guess maybe a similar, like, or other non-Euclidean land use bylaws within our region, our neighboring municipalities? Like, perhaps, like, is there, maybe more specifically, and what I'm getting at, is there a change in, or will be a change in nomenclature for zoning types or anything like that could pose issues with developers or even neighboring regions? I don't know if I'm totally off the mark in thinking that, but.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so. I think as we go through this process, we're going to be talking with all of our stakeholders. I don't want to presume what the end product is like, but you know, I think some of the language I hope is going to change, but I think it's going to change in a way that's going to make sense. As an example, like we have a use class right now of single detached dwelling, which is really a building of a house. It's not so much a use. You know, so really we want to give some thought about how do we name certain uses and build forms. How do we define them? So I think the goal is certainly to make more sense and to be pragmatic. And so I think to a layperson, some of the terminology that we have right now doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think we want to take a fairly practical approach and kind of shake things up a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, certainly that's definitely a desired outcome, and I really look forward to seeing how the iterations of this work and evolves and the implementation of it. I guess maybe a follow-up question to the subject is, so in Fort Saskatchewan, we're kind of going to see a transition. So we have a grid pattern downtown, and that was the beginning of land use and area structure plans within Fort Saskatchewan. And then we evolved to a kind of a ring road type design for developments. This is going to essentially be a third type of look for neighborhoods within the city. Yeah, just in terms of the uniformity of our entire city, would this pose potentially any risks or concerns with infrastructure or just the use and design overall? And I know that's a very broad question, but you don't have to answer specifically or in too much detail. But yeah, are there any big risks associated with a new transition like this?
Through Mr. Chair to Councillor Nguyen, no, I wouldn't say big risk, but as the MDP recognizes the different place types and this approach will be different, so I don't necessarily think it's a risk, but it's just will be different, and it won't have any impact on infrastructure as such. Like all those things are planned out at the ASP neighborhood structure plan level, and so this will be just how those neighborhoods would be further subdivided, how the massing and how the scale will work within those neighborhoods. So there shouldn't be any risk from infrastructure perspective. And you mentioned the word uniformity, and so that's why I'm taking it back to the places in Fort Saskatchewan are not uniform. That's what we found out in the MDP. There are different neighborhoods are different, and so this land use bylaw will respect that and build on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. Yeah, and I think we've had some good preliminary discussion about this already at our West Rivers Edge session, and I look forward to the meetings in person as well. Thank you.
Then any other questions, comments? Thank you, folks. Have a good day.
To your chair, I wanted to just point out a couple of things when Mayor Catcher asked her questions.
Certainly.
In the MDP, we do identify where the nodes would be for the mature areas and established areas, and they are where the existing strip malls are. So kind of build on those locations and bring services that people need and the intensification can support. Like, so those nodes locations are identified for the most of the city. They're not identified for the future urban areas, which will be done through the area structure plan and neighborhood structure plan process. And there was, and speaking to the work in the future urban areas, the engineering is currently looking at the serviceability of the of those lands. So that's the first step. After we figure that out, how the servicing could work, which area could come, on market first, which could be the last. After that, we will be in position to consider any area structure plans.
Super. Mayor Catcher, questions?
Okay, thank you. So for speaking to that, so you're talking about the existing nodes, and I think you had mentioned that time when we were talking about it before, and you gave us the example of Pineview, the Pineview node, and that if you were to redo the land use bylaw, you would put in new requirements if there was redevelopment taking place that they would have to conform to. Is that what you're talking about?
Through Mr. Chairman, to Mayor Catcher, yes. So we would be looking at like how would those to meet the vision of the nodes that's explained in the MDP. What kind of regulations we need to add to that place type, so that we are getting the human scale development where the nodes are. We are getting the right amount of intensity, right scale of development. So yes, there would be some regulations that would speak to.
So I guess that leads me to my next question then. So as we're talking about that one, and I'll use their example as Pineview, if all of a sudden, so it takes years to redevelop these in many cases, but I'm going to ask the question, if you put in so many regulations, are we not risking the same as kind of what's happened downtown? You put in too many regulations and then they just say, well, we'll just let it deteriorate.
Through Mr. Chairman to Mayor Catcher, you're correct. We have to strike a balance of putting in right regulations, putting in right flexibility, so there are not too many regulations, but still we achieve the main objectives of the MDP. So rather than having like micromanagement or like micro control, like we want to put emphasis on, like, we are meeting the big objectives of the MDP, and we are giving flexibility to the landowners and developers to work.
Okay, so you're going to build, the intent is to build flexibility. So if I can just ask one more question. So then when we're talking about these nodes, and we have our couple nodes in our downtown on the old fort and the old giant tiger site, what's your vision for what should be done on those? Or because right now I believe they're C5s and they're fairly flexible, but I'm not sure how flexible they are. So what's your vision or your thoughts on those? Or do they just become grandfathered?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess as we work through the process with the land use bylaw, I'm currently right now, it is, as you said, it's districted as C5. But we haven't got to the process where we've started to draft regulations for it. There is policy within the MDP specific to the downtown. They are fairly high level. But the MDP also talks about reviewing the downtown area redevelopment plan as well. And that would set, I guess, some framework for the downtown as a whole. Or potentially what we could look at it with this project is whether or not the land use bylaw would provide the appropriate regulatory framework for those two parcels of land, but the downtown as a place type in and of itself.
Okay, thanks. I'm good.
Councillor Harris, please.
Ms. Shindy, you raised a really important point. We can do all the land use planning we want. We can have MDPs that talk about what uses are generally in larger areas, density or whatever. But you touched on a point about the fact that we have reached the maximum of our ability to provide sanitary sewer service to the development area in South Fort. I was fortunately intimately involved in the planning for South Fort when I worked for the city. And I know that we effectively have got no more capacity, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Smith-Duguid, to service sanitary sewer going south. So that's going to mean a whole new framework for infrastructure development. So my question is there a specific project that is then looking at how all of that is taking place in terms of what our development capacity is going forward? Is that happening as we speak? Maybe I missed it, or you have to refresh my memory. Because if we don't get that right, then land use in itself is kind of a moot point.
Through the chair, there is actually a significant amount of work going on to study that. The previous council approved the money to do all of the technical and infrastructure studies for the annexation areas. I think it was in the neighborhood of $400,000 or $500,000, a significant amount of money, and it's a multi-year project that is kind of partway through. So
okay, good. Thank you for refreshing my memory. That was an eon ago, and we have two new members of council on it, because I think that's a real important part of it, because if we don't get that right, we can't do any development. So, Ms. Shindy, thank you for that thing, because that dovetails very nicely to the overlay of what you're doing in relation to the overall planning framework in the land use bylaw. So thank you.
All right. Any further questions, Council? If nothing, I'll thank you folks. Have a good day. Takes us to section 7, councillor inquiries. Any from any person?
I do.
You still have a mic. Go ahead.
A question I have, I drive by it every day when I'm going down 95A Avenue, and the access into McNichol, there is a transit booth or shelter there that was donated by the Lions many years ago. That thing is in a horrible state of repair. The glass, the panels, they've been marked up, they're dirty, I don't know. But my question to administration is, what are we doing to clean that up, and or I guess the status of our other transit benches, that sort of stuff? What are we doing to ensure that those things are maintained properly and look well?
Through your worship, we can look at this specific one and do a cleanup. As for the overall, this will be built into our asset management plan, and regular checkups and statuses will be part of that work.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. The one in particular is the one on 95A Avenue, and that one has looked horrible for a long time, so I'm really surprised something hasn't been done already, but thank you for looking into it.
Thank you. If nobody else, I have a question, Mr. Fleming. At last council meeting, Mr. Gagnon indicated to a question that I had that there'd be some information forthcoming back to council. Haven't seen it yet, so just put it back on the plate, or if you would please, and maybe check on it.
Through your worship, which information specifically? Or
the line of questioning was around, oh, yeah, it was something relatively minor that we kind of stumbled on, was tagging the boulevard trees. And
yeah.
I just had, the question was why we quit or stopped. And through a series of questions, we finally got around to what happened to the budget money that was allocated to do that for the last 3 years. Appreciate it. Thank you.
To you, Mr. Chair, we do have this flagged for follow-up. That key staff member was away last week, but it is still on our list.
As long as it was caught and it's not forgotten, that's great. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we have an in-camera session scheduled. I need a motion from council to go in camera according to the rules of FOIP. Mercatcher or Birgit, either one, Councillor Blizzard. Mercatcher, I can click you in because you're right there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll make the motion that council go in camera to discuss matters that fall within the exceptions to disclosure in a division of Part 2 or Division 2 of Part 1 of the Freedom and Protection Act.
Thank you. Those in favor? Call the question. Just indicate verbally if you would, Councillor Blizzard. Just did? Okay.
How come that didn't come up?
Because we went in camera. Right?
Perfect. Thank you. We'll continue in camera.
Oh, the technical.
Said you've never sat in this chair, have you? Well, that's what I kind of thought today. You